I graduated from art college way back in 1988. I was in Bristol in England, and I've pretty much stayed making art ever since then, which I've been very fortunate with. My main area, I suppose, would be charcoal drawing. I do painting as well, but I actually do a lot of charcoal drawing, mainly animals and life drawing. And really I work from home in a studio, and I've been in Sligo for 21 years now, and been working away really since the moment I got here. The Cordia exhibition for the Cordia Festival, I'm part of the kind of committee, if you like, that we put the ideas together, and really the basis was to bring together 8, 6, 8, 10, we kind of mulled over the numbers a few times, but a few artists locally, living locally, to present an exhibition for the Cordia Arts Festival. And myself and Barra are curating the exhibition and also taking part. So I was really delighted to get involved because, one of my, I suppose, personal involvements or interests in it is that local artists to Sligo do get a chance to showcase their work, and I mean this is the perfect platform to do it. The theme of the exhibition was an issue worth mentioning. Now, anybody that's living now on the planet, there are so many issues that really are worth mentioning. It was quite difficult to try and hone it down, but in my own personal practice, I really enjoy drawing animals, and in particular I enjoy drawing hares. So one of the things which has come to my notice fairly recently is that hare coursing seems to be a blood sport which is very much alive and well in Ireland, and I chose this as my theme because I think that the hare, for me, it's a totemic animal. Everybody has a totem, and the hare is definitely mine. And I wanted to make drawings of my favourite thing, which is the hare, but also the idea of the hare coursing. I mean, it's difficult if you ever see any footage of it, it's really quite horrific. And I mean, the beauty and elegance of the hare is so much more than just this awful piece of prey that's being hunted down by these dogs. The odds are stacked against it. Unfortunately, there is practice now where hares are actually taken to islands and the dogs are set on them there. So, I mean, they've actually no way of escaping. It is a complete blood sport, and it's something which I find utterly abhorrent, completely unnecessary. And I thought that if I used this platform to maybe highlight that issue, maybe somebody might think twice about it, and it might bring it back to the attention of the general populace. It's also, of course, it's a great vehicle for me to be able to draw what I love drawing the most. And it's kind of ironic that the drawings that I've made of the hare, I haven't put any dogs in those drawings because I don't want them part of it, even though the essence of the drawing is the hare running from the dog. So I've made 2 pictures like that, and then one which is slightly different. I read and write quite a lot of poetry, so I've used one of my own personal poems to make a piece of art as well.
I suppose one of the things that rules or kind of influences my work is the fact that I used to work in theatre and used to do set design and props and things like that. And I suppose I have a background because of my father in theatre as well. And because of that, I've always worked with interiors, either in a sculptural way or painting or photography, and quite often all 3 together. An issue worth mentioning can be anything, and I had a long list that I could have responded to. And it's as easy as it seems to stop wasting. It's not, because not just because we live in a consumer society and we are completely wound up in this idea of we need to produce and then to consume in order to even have an economy. You know, it's so integrated that it's not as simple as, okay, I stop buying or I just don't throw this away. My mother has been cleaning up or tidying up and throwing things out for the last 3 years since my father died. And, you know, as I said, I come from a long line of hoarders, so this is something we talk about in terms of like, what do you hang on to and what do you throw away? What has had its use and what is ready for new use, or what can be used for something else, or can you take apart? And you know, we would have always done that. But I find it fascinating where do you decide that something has had its time and kind of get rid of it, you know? So I came across this little Polaroid which I'd made years ago, and it's off a bin bag, and I kept it. I always kept it. It's in its own casing because it was the last Polaroid of that box. So the casing becomes the frame. I suppose for me that image is about the fact that, you know, one man's rubbish is another man's treasure, and the Polaroid being, you know, really hard to get now. It was becoming something really precious, something expensive, but it's so throwaway. It's so disposable and so instant, which is, for me, ties in with the idea of how we consume and how we throw things away. So in relation to that is the fact that I did not want to use the kind of obvious waste material as the art in order to make that image. Not because I don't like it, because I use a lot of man-made or found objects, but the issue itself is not that simple. About kind of, okay, well then we just use it again for something else, because it just keeps growing anyway. So that's it.
Well, I started by going to art college and graduating, and then continued painting and teaching art. And this was in London. And then I came to Sligo in 1997 and started my own studio in town. And since then I've been painting very continuously. But I also have a gallery which I run. Most of my work is concerned with painting with acrylic and using great use of colour. I'm interested in music as a source of inspiration, and I would normally do a body of work in different genres. For instance, I work on the theme of landscape. I work on the theme of musicians, and I also then have a body of work which is mostly purely abstract work on the orchestration of colour. Well, I suppose that my normal practice, I don't tend to respond to specific issues or causes, but it was a challenge, and I thought, well, this is something I would like to do, and I thought the issue I would like to bring up would be the one of prisoners of conscience and Amnesty International. I'm a member of Amnesty International, and coincidentally then I happened to hear the lyrics of Whispering Hope, and it kind of gelled with me and the whole theme of Prisoner of Conscience. So I started a piece of work using colour acrylic paint, as I would in most of my paintings.
I practice as a painter primarily. I've practiced full-time now for the last 7 years from Strand Hill, my home. I have a studio there. Been working like that since I completed my honours degree in Sligo Institute of Technology, Fine Art Department. And primarily I paint, as I said, and seascapes would be my subject matter. Content of that would be climate change. And I think that came about because at the very beginning of my practice, change was becoming a big issue. It was coming out of conspiracy theory and into the mainstream media. And having been raised on a farm, the weather was always a preoccupation throughout my life anyway. So I thought, what better way to put what I already had in terms of observational skills into my work. And I've been painting ever since. I was delighted. I was delighted that my work would be in context for the first time. So that really spurred me on to one, re-look at and rethink what I was already doing in terms of the seascapes, the weather in particular. And I looked more towards the landscape for this particular project to make it more localized rather than the general aspects of seascape and everything that can be projected onto that as an image. So I looked more towards local landscape and the particular weather events we've had in the last couple of years. Spring in particular, which was so desolate this year, dry, the landscape was incredibly burnt out, and I thought that would make just a wonderful visual representation of the time we're at now in terms of climate change, environmental issues. So there's a whole range of thinking that goes behind the actual subject matter that you see within the painting itself. You can, given the history of landscape, you can project a multitude onto a very small painting. So I've used photographs for this particular body of work that I've produced. I started with the 2010 winter, 16 below, temperatures that were unheard of at the time. And again, the spring painting as well. I've also included the sea as well in that particular piece.
Yeah, well, I'm a painter primarily, and I just use, I suppose, the basics of art, drawing, pencils, charcoals, and oil paint, acrylic, gouache. So I'm very much in the messy end of things, the creation end of things, rather than the theory or the conceptual side of things. And I've just been painting constantly. I've been painting now for probably over 20 years. So that's the kind of thing that excites me, using materials, using making something, actually physically making the painting in front of you. I really am reflecting on the environment. And I mean, I go to places that are remote, are wild, or I seek out places that aren't spoiled, which is a hard thing to do these days, and harder to do. And somebody told me, why don't you paint the rubbish that you're tripping over when you go to these places? And I don't do that. I photograph the places and it's all there, but they're changing, you know, landscapes are changing and they're being denuded and they're being destroyed, or, you know, you go to some places and they're constantly being interfered with. And that in itself is probably as much as a statement as anything else. I don't consciously make statements in my work. The painting I've chosen here is, I mean, it's based on a hidden well near where I live, and I used to take my kids there, and you know, I used to try and impress on them that this water has to be kept, you know, at all times clear and fresh. And you know, you try to do that Native American thing where you pass on to the kids, this is the simplicity of nature. We're all in a cycle, and if we destroy nature, we're going to destroy our own, you know, our own environment. So the idea that we went to the well and we collected this pure water, and it was a kind of a hidden well, but we were all like custodians of this well, and we had to keep it safe. That tied in a lot with my own beliefs and ideas. I actually had work in the studio that I felt related to the theme of the environment, or my feelings about the environment. And because I've just constantly been painting the landscape all the time, I just felt that they tied in. As I said, Path to the Well was the first one I chose. I just felt that this was so, you know, it was symbolic of my beliefs and how we treat the environment and how we relate to the environment around us. I suppose in the political sphere, I'd be concerned about the fracking companies that are threatening to come into the northwest of Ireland, around the border area, and the whole concern there amongst the communities, the farming communities in particular, is that they would destroy the water supply, which is, of course, you know, deeply almost like a sacred thing in all societies and cultures, but particularly in Ireland where the wells were, they were like holy sites and they were sacred sites. So this notion that the water table would be disturbed or polluted is a deep thing in a society which is rural and needs its water supply. Also relying on tourism and relying on the idea that this is an unspoilt landscape, and if we destroy that, I mean, we technically we don't have anything really. And we know what happens when profits govern a society, as we saw in the last decades. There was wholesale destruction, overbuilding, etc., etc. So we don't want. I mean, it's just something I would be very wary of. And again, the painting is again a quiet kind of. It's not a obvious political statement, but it is a personal statement. As I say, a snapshot in time. Based on this well that we used to go to for water, and the idea that I was, trying to tell my kids that we have to respect these places and we have to continue this, I suppose, protection of them. And if they can inherit that and maybe pass that on to their kids, then you feel you've done something positive.
I moved to Ireland in the mid-90s. For the last 3 years I've been working, practicing here from the Model Studios. And my work has kind of diverged quite a lot. So it would go across disciplines. So it would I'd be using drawing, printmaking, photography. More recently I've been using sound, and it would kind of go into 3D and installation. In terms of the kind of subject matter or themes I work on, it's fairly broad and would tend to go off in different directions. But essentially, I think it's about how we all kind of negotiate our lives, and it's quite often in direct response to personal experience and the experience of people around me. Firstly, I thought it was great that the festival organisers had thought about giving a platform for people to actually respond to things that they really cared about or were concerned about, because I think particularly in this climate with cuts across all services, it's really important that people are able to voice things that they are worried about. I didn't specifically make work for this. I think this is a continuation of work that I've been doing since about 2009. It started with a body of work called the Obsessive Compulsive Drawings, and it was in direct response to something that was going on in my own family circumstances. And so the issue that I decided that I wanted to bring awareness to in this particular exhibition is child and adolescent mental health. I suppose because of my situation, I've had direct experience of the facilities that are available here in Sligo. And on the one hand, you have the people on the ground who are working. There's an incredibly fantastic team of practitioners and professionals who are working within the mental health service, particularly with young people and adolescents. And probably not very many people know, but there's a place down the road off the Mall called Molloway House, which is a child and family mental health centre, and they offer just the most fantastic service. So I suppose I wanted to highlight the service that is there, the fantastic people that are working there, but also the difficulties that they are increasingly facing in providing that level of service. So the two particular pieces of work that I'm presenting, one is called Half Full, Half Empty, and it's essentially three beakers which have they're half full of wax. Actually, there is a text on them. So I suppose for me that is about how easy it is for us all to slip between the one and the other. You know, depending on what is going on in our lives or external circumstances or whatever, how easily it is to move from a situation where you are quite happy with your life to a point where you can actually fall into some kind of crisis. So that is one part of the work. The other part of the work is called Possibilities, and it's a big pile of wishbones which are housed in a glass container. And it's not so much about wishing on a star, but more about the possibilities that are open in terms of, maybe accessing help when you need it, and that through intervention from professionals and practitioners, there are lots of possibilities and opportunities to move your life forward. So I suppose it's those two sides to the work, and I would see the two pieces as being kind of counterpoints to each other.
I've got no training. I didn't go to art school, and I didn't grow up in a family that was all artistic. My wife did, but I didn't. It wasn't discouraged in my family. It was just not even a thing. I came from a very kind of working class background, and there was no way I'd be able to go to art college. It was like financially it would be just a non-starter. When I was 16, I went to work, and did metal work. My dad was a welder, and so was my brother. So I got into metal work, but then just all the welding and grinding just used to bore me. And so it wasn't until I moved to Ireland that I got into forge work. And then it was just like an explosion. It was like unbelievable, where all of a sudden all that creativity had bottled up for how many years doing crappy jobs, and then you just you couldn't turn it off then. It was impossible to turn it off. And so that's kind of my background, is I'm pretty much 99% self-taught, apart from the year that I worked with Brian Halban. I'm lucky that because of my portfolio now, customers very rarely ask to see drawings or anything like that, so I can give them an idea and then just go and create, And so I don't like to draw my work because I think my medium is hot forged steel, which is different to drawing something and then you're forging something to a different medium, do you know? And so 90% of my work, or 99% of my work, is just hot forged steel. I have used other materials like bronze and copper and silver in my work. But most of the time, I'm in love with forged metal. It's just the most beautiful thing in the world to me. It's what blacksmiths term, in the blacksmiths term, they call it the black look. There's blacksmiths that are in love with making stuff. Some people are in love with the process, and some people are actually in love with the material. And I very quickly, within days of working with Brian, fell in love with the texture you get when there's a way of forging metal where the surface is just gorgeous. It's beautiful when it's still hot but it's lost colour, and you've forged it in one heat, and there's a luster that comes across the metal which is really addictive. And I'm always trying to capture that in my work, or like that's the thing, if I can get that. And sometimes because of the process you have to heat it 5 or 6 times, and each time you heat it you lose a bit of that. And so it's kind of like it's like alchemy comes from the forge, and that's the alchemy of forge work, is trying to get that into my work. So the faster you can work, the better, but because your work gets more elaborate over time and it becomes impossible sometimes. I am very opinionated, which most people who know me know, and I have strong feelings. But the other side of that is I want my work to portray that. So I don't give mission statements and I don't explain my work. For me, that is the exciting thing about art. And so I see it as my job that I portray my feelings and emotions that I'm working into my work, especially my sculptural work, what I call my speculative sculpture work, which is stuff that I make for myself that isn't made for a commission or for a customer or a public piece of work. I'm portraying my feelings about whatever I'm feeling at the time, or there might be a subject that I'm really concentrating on, and that's what it will be about. The other thing I try to do in my work is get people to touch it, because it's robust work, it's not going to break. I love it when people can't help themselves but to feel it and touch it. Before a lot of my work was a response to environment, and this latest series of work is really about getting my frustrations out into physical form, to really stop myself going mad with all these kind of ideas and emotions about what it's, you know, the day-to-day struggles since the recession and the craziness of everything. And especially, I'm sure it's the same, I don't know what it's like in the recession to work doing a 9-to-5 job, so I wouldn't know, but of being a full-time artist and having to survive in the current climate and all of the crazy things that go along with that. So each piece is a response of that. The two major pieces, the Gift and Black Wave, are kind of that kind of response to my emotional state more than anything else, I suppose. But other than that, I won't say anymore.
Well, I'm originally from Dublin, moved here to Sligo about a decade ago. Never went to conventional college. I could consider myself predominantly self-taught as an artist, but I did do some skill-based courses, very valuable skill-based courses. I love it here in Sligo, and can't imagine living anywhere else really. It's got everything I want and need. I guess as an artist, I work in all sorts of materials. I think my favourite would be ceramics. I tend to go back to them again and again and again, but I work in mixed media, found objects, I weld, I cast, I work in everything, I carve. And that's pretty much my background. My ideas come from all over the place. It could be a scribble on a paper, a bit of a doodle in a sketch pad, or something I read would trigger off an idea. So sometimes the sculpture kind of comes first through form or colour or texture, and then the kind of concept or idea kind of develops from that, and sometimes it's the other way around. I'm one of the co-organisers of this exhibition, along with Tara McGowan and Heidi Wickham, and together we were basically working on this. It was Tara's idea to have a theme to the show, and she wanted it to be about people's issues. She wanted people to talk about their issues, and it was Heidi's idea to film us artists and put it in the actual show, and get the artists to respond to the theme. And an issue worth mentioning is the theme and the title of the show. And we thought it'd be interesting for artists to, well, if they're not used to working on issues or themes like this, it's interesting, it's challenging for them, and they might come up with something they normally wouldn't. The work I made for the show, I'm making two pieces. I have to say they're not actually finished yet. One of them is about overfishing. It's a global problem. It's a big problem, and it's a big threat to a lot of ecosystems and the environment. It's not too late to change that, and it can be actually still saved as a problem. And well, this piece is kind of just addressing that. It's just in a kind of a comical way. It's a guy sitting in a boat on his own with a fishing rod, and he's really having a great day because he's fished so much that it's tilting the boat, it's weighing the boat down, and he's popped up, and it's just saying it's a bit greedy. We don't need to take that much fish, and we need to think about what fish we're taking and where we're taking them from. And the second piece it's about the fat cat sitting on top and everyone below him. He's sitting up on his throne, and everyone else is basically sheeple with their eyes closed, happily grazing away, oblivious to the bigger picture. I think it's basically talking about how this has always been like this. I mean, there's been royalty, there's been the church, there's been huge businessmen and companies all the time, and they always are the fat cat on top. There's nothing new about this. It's always been like that, and it always probably will be like that. So in that way, I don't think it's really an issue as in something that can be changed. It's kind of always going to be like that.